Hey guys, welcome into the 14. I'm Nick Cole, and we're breaking down each SEC football game in Week 10 from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the LSU Tigers visiting the Alabama Crimson Tide. This game is going to be aired on ESPN at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 6 p.m. in Tuscaloosa. This game is going to be at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And from a betting perspective, it opened with Alabama as a 29-point favorite. That line's moved a little bit across the week here, and as the recording of this video, it's at the Crimson Tide favored by 28.5. The over-under in the game opened at 63.5, and it has shot up all the way to 66.5. Bringing our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, this isn't the game that we're used to it being, is it?
It's not. Roll Tide what? I guess I'll not make you finish that so we don't get in trouble with YouTube. But instead, why don't you give us the weather and the injuries and Nick's news and notes?
Sure. So from a weather standpoint, betting this game should be pretty easy. The temperature on Saturday in Tuscaloosa should be in the 50s, and we should have a low wind under 5 miles an hour, so nothing's going to impact the game, and a low chance of rain as well. From an injury standpoint, Alabama, nothing really new for them on the injury front, but for LSU, there's obviously a laundry list of players who are out for various reasons. Among the players not out for the year, you've got safeties Sage Ryan and Major Burns are going to be out for this game. Cornerback Cordell Flott is doubtful. And then LSU also has 4 linemen that probably will play, but are contending with injuries of varying degrees of pain thresholds. Sophomore running back Trey Bradford is finally healthy and eligible and will be available this weekend, so that maybe helps LSU ground game that has saw some traction at some points in the last month or so. On the news and notes standpoint, let's start with Alabama and sort of they were, believe it or not, kind of a surprise story in the college football playoff this week. The initial rankings came out and the Tide was right there at number 2 behind number 1 Georgia. And that was a little bit unexpected from a national standpoint. I think a lot of people looked at them and saw that one loss against A&M. There's several unbeaten teams. They figured that would be ahead of them. They were ahead of them in the AP poll and the coaches poll, but the college football playoff committee said, no, this is the second best team in the country, which, from a betting standpoint, I don't know that it offers much to us, but from a practical standpoint, looking at will the Tide be a potential playoff team, the answer is very clear that the CFP committee sees them as one. It's just a matter of following through and not tripping and having that second loss, at least not having it before they get to an eventual SEC title matchup with Georgia potentially. So anyway, that was an interesting thing for the Tide coming out of a bye week there. LSU obviously playing out the Ed Orgeron era. He was obviously asked about the last trip to Tuscaloosa that he made in 2019, where the Tigers beat Nick Saban's Crimson Tide, and they certainly celebrated it with the Roll Tide what that you're referencing in the post-game locker room celebration, a little celebration on the midfield at Bryant-Denny Stadium, rubbed a lot of Crimson Tide fans the wrong way, and rightfully so. But Orgeron's kind of backtracking things this week as he's on his way out, understands his team isn't where it was a couple of years ago, and maybe, is a little bit afraid of getting run out of the building. But he said, let me quote him so I make sure I get it right. That was something that was, to me, about privacy in the locker room, and he wished it wouldn't have gotten out. He meant no disrespect to anybody in Alabama, according to him. I don't know how you hear that quote and don't think there was some disrespect involved there. But the question is he just begging for mercy from Nick Saban? Is he looking for an analyst job from Nick Saban, defensive line job from Nick Saban? I don't know, but I don't think any of that's going to help him when his team has to take the field on Saturday night. Christopher, last thing I mentioned before we get into the betting analysis, Nick Saban is actually 11-4 against his former team in LSU there. And I think we're pretty confident in saying with the way this line stacks up and the way LSU's played this season that he's going to move to 12-4. But my question to you is he going to do so in impressive enough fashion to cover that 28.5 point spread?
In my AL.com story on this game this week centered around the idea of betting teams versus betting numbers. So what that means is the public, which is basically casual bettors that don't get a ton of respect from odds makers, usually bets on teams, right? Like in this matchup, it's clear the team that you would trust out of the two, forgetting the number, is Alabama. So the public is generally going to bet on Alabama in this game. Now, the sharps or smarter bettors, pro bettors, bet numbers. Now, they may side with the team the public does, or maybe not. It depends on what the number actually is. And, just to go into trusting Alabama and not trusting LSU, there's a lot of news and notes in this game. One of those that we couldn't get to in depth yet is LSU canceling practices last week. And it seems like the headline was injuries are keeping LSU from practicing. But the reality, if you dig into it, is yes, they do have injuries, but it wasn't like they couldn't have practiced. But you got to think all of the coaches and the staff on LSU's program are probably spending some time last week working on securing their next job. And then you already know a lot of their players who are injured are working toward going to the NFL. You had recruit decommit and flip to Alabama. You also had Miles Brennan, the quarterback, announce that he's transferring away from LSU. So I think a lot of players on the LSU roster are probably thinking about transfer decisions that aren't going to the NFL next year as well, depending on who they bring in as the next coach. And then, of course, you have Alabama, which I'm sure took a little bit different of an approach during the bye week than what we probably saw from LSU, who everyone's kind of focused on themselves, not necessarily getting ready for Alabama. So the other side of that is if you look at the projection and the numbers, ESPN's SP Plus has this as Alabama by 22.6 points. The Action Network has this as Alabama by 24 points. Those are two pretty well-respected sort of baseline, forward-thinking, predictive projections. And that doesn't necessarily take into account, injuries or whether LSU is focused and that sort of thing. But going from 22.5 or 24 to 28.5 or 29, that's a lot of key numbers there in college football. And, despite the circumstances and despite Alabama being a big favorite and obviously the team that you can trust more, I'm not sure that the line is clearly inflated from what the number probably should be, even despite all of that. But if you do look at LSU, yeah, I think the Florida game threw a lot of people off. They beat Florida. And even the Ole Miss game threw people off to an extent because LSU was trailing 31-7 in the fourth quarter of that game and got 2 late scores. And we talked a little bit about LSU's not playing great football right now, and they're beat up. So then you look at Kentucky, LSU got completely manhandled in that game, lost 42-21. The score wasn't, the score was closer than the result actually was. So outside of the Florida game, which they had 4 turnovers, which somehow they turned an LSU team that can't rush for 3 yards a carry into looking like Herschel Walker. Outside of that one game, I think we can see what LSU is. And in that Kentucky game, Kayshon Boutte got hurt. Since that game injury, LSU is throwing for 6.7 yards per carry in the passing game. And over the course of a full season, that would be only ahead of Vanderbilt in the SEC. And they're also on defense, 100 in EPA per snap against the run and 103rd in EPA per snap against the pass. And they're missing presumably 5 starting defensive backs from what they were looking at before the season started. So I think we know what LSU is. The question is, are you just betting teams? Or are you betting numbers? And what do you think the right number should be if you are betting numbers? So Nick, who are you taking in this game on the side and the total?
So first of all, I want to say with my real money, I'm always transparent on this. I'm staying far away from this game because I don't know what to expect from LSU moving forward. When you've got some distractions, you've got some injuries, you've got some questionable motives from the coaching staff, from the players trying to decide what their future is. I don't know that any of that focus is on, or all of the focus is on winning this football game like it should be. So that being said, I'm staying away from this mostly because I don't like this line. I'll play the role of the square in this because I am betting a team for purposes of making the picks here. I think Alabama is in a much better place coming off of a bye week, getting that added fuel of being considered the number 2 team in the country and understanding, and not that Nick Saban's team looks ahead or whatever, but understanding that this is the next step in redeeming themselves in the eyes of becoming a playoff team. So I'm going to lay the 28.5 for the purposes of picks here, take Alabama, just because I like where they're at. Much better. I know what the numbers say. Maybe that Alabama's only going to win by 21 or instead of 28.5. But when I reach this point in the season, I feel like I like the home team that has their head on straight. And I'm going to take the under 66.5. Simply because I don't know that I trust LSU's offense beyond, like you said, that sort of fluky performance against Florida. It's been pretty gross at times. So I think Alabama wins this comfortably, and I don't know that we get up much over the mid 60s there. How about you?
I think on the total, what I'm looking at is an LSU defense that ranks 100th or 103rd on against the run and against the pass. So I don't feel like they're going to put up much resistance at all against Alabama. They're pretty decent at rushing the passer still, which Alabama has had an issue with, but I don't see LSU really stopping Alabama from scoring 40+ points in this game. It wouldn't shock me if Alabama was even in the 50s. And then on the other side, LSU is not going to be able to run the ball here. And I'm throwing out the Florida game. They're not going to be able to run. And they're going to be throwing the ball a ton because they're going to get behind. And their only hope, I think, on offense is to hit some explosive plays in the passing game and just try to catch Alabama off guard somehow, try to hit a big play, take some shots down the field. And, that's going to stop the clock when it doesn't work. And maybe it does work a few times because LSU still has some pretty good athletes over there. So because of those reasons, I think I'm going to take the over. And on the side, give me LSU plus 28.5. Again, like Nick, like you said, it's basically what I see this game is as LSU or pass. And for me, it's a total pass. And if you look at Alabama, and especially their Power 5 opponents this season, they beat Miami and they beat Mississippi State by greater than 28.5. They didn't beat Tennessee or Ole Miss or Florida or Texas A&M by more than that margin. So you got to think, like, where is LSU? I think they're probably a little bit better than Miami was in the opener. I think they're probably a little bit better than Mississippi State was with an injured quarterback a few weeks ago. So we'll see. But if I had to bet this game on the side, it's got to be LSU for me. But again, Nick and I are both staying away from the side with our money. So for Nicole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and we'll talk to you next week.